Hi, and welcome back to Arisa's podcast, Native Narratives. Today we have two mental health experts with us who will be sharing insights, stories, and a lot of fun facts about brain and everything the brain does. We have Sakshi with us, who is a psychologist and has trained clinically and is also working with neuropsychology. We have Manmohi with us, who is a brain expert. She does neuroanatomy, neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience. And welcome to our podcast. And I will let you guys briefly talk us through your journey of arriving at where you are today. So let's begin with Manmohi.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks a lot to Arisa Foundation for having us here today and talk about what we really love. So, my journey into neuroscience started actually here in Pune. I did my BA in psychology from Ferguson College, and we had one brain class. I think, like since it's a Bachelor of Arts degree, there's not really that much weightage given to the sciences, but there was one brain class like neurochemistry and things like that, and I was absolutely fascinated, just as much as I was in school. And I decided that just then that I do want to, pursue a science degree in psychology or like neuroscience. At that time, I used to call it neurobiology. And then one of the professors corrected me saying, no, it's actually neuropsychology, not neurobiology. That's what you want to be doing. So then that sort of led me to look at some courses and see where I could get further training in neuropsychology. And I pursued my degree in neuropsychology at Bristol University. Um, and during the degree, I didn't quite think that I really learned what I wanted to learn. Like there was not really that much neuroanatomy and cognitive neuroscience as I'd hoped. So then I did a master's of research in cognitive neuroscience and human neuroimaging, during which I did this research project about obesity and brain structure in Alzheimer's disease and in normal aging. And I was so fascinated by it, I decided that this is what I want to be doing. So this project sort of evolved into my PhD with my master supervisor. So I developed a project with her and we applied for funding and we got it. So my PhD was centered around the effect of modifiable lifestyle factors and how they can affect brain structure and function in Alzheimer's disease and in normal aging. So what was the most interesting part about this PhD is that even I never really drew the connection that your heart health is very highly correlated to your brain health, because your heart actually supplies blood to your brain. So if something's wrong with your heart, something is going to be wrong with your brain. That's why conditions like obesity, hypertension, diabetes can have a significant impact on your brain. Also, it can actually increase your risk for neurodegeneration or neurodegenerative diseases. We will explain what this means a little bit further into the podcast. But yes, basically the premise is that whatever affects the heart affects your brain, and it can increase not just the risk of you developing a condition like this, but also if you have this condition, then it can exert a burden that can make your symptoms actually worse. But more on that later. Back to you.
That's quite interesting. Also, very academic. So, I would love to sort of get into the depths of what all of these terminologies mean. But moving to a more practical field that Sakshi, you have been in for so long, would you like to talk us through your journey and what it was like to be in a hospital setting, meeting these individuals every day and interacting with them?
So I did my bachelor's in psychology from SIS Mumbai, and I took a gap. I realized that I really wanted to learn more. So I went on to do my master's in clinical psychology, and I loved diagnosis. Like I was waiting every day that there'll be a case that will come, and I will figure out what is it, like Dr. House does. So I was very fascinated. And one of my professors reached out to me in my master's, knowing that I was absolutely crazy about diagnosis. So she reached out to me with a cognitive psych lead, and this was a project with Birmingham, in which they were translating and adapting a neuropsych battery in Hindi and Marathi. This was with Birmingham and Oxford both. I did that for a period of 1.5 years, and through that, I also got placed in a hospital. I was working under some very senior neuropsychologists. So most of my training came from there and from working, translating the battery. And I figured I really like this. So I went on to do some specialization courses in Canterbury in old geriatric neuropsychology. So I love mostly diagnosis and also intervention now. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I think a couple of words that we came across so far were neurodegenerative, just neuroanatomy, diagnosis, and stuff. So, for somebody who does not know any of these things and who associates diagnosis with going to a doctor, how would you break down these neuroterminologies?
You want to?
Sure. Um, so my main area of interest is neurodegeneration. So basically, that's what I do now. I actually just realized I forgot to mention what I do currently. So I'm the founder and CEO of Silver Matters. We are a company that develops products, specifically AI products, using deep learning to detect neurological diseases in their earliest stages using MRI. So neurodegeneration, what does it mean? Um, so neuro obviously means the brain. Degeneration means the lowering of some substrate. So what that means together is that there is reduction of brain matter over time, and usually you have these plethora or spectrum of neurodegenerative diseases. So people can get different ones. You might have heard the terms Alzheimer's, you might have heard terms like Parkinson's, Huntington's, ALS. So all these form a class of neurodegenerative diseases where there is a reduction of neurons or in brain matter over time. And well, why do these happen? So different neurodegenerative diseases tend to have different risk factors, but a lot of these risk factors, well, one of the most common risk factors for all neurodegenerative diseases happens to be age.
Yeah.
So actually humans have only been, well, the human anatomy has only been designed for a human to live up until 60 years, but with increased technology, with better medical facilities, with more help available, our average lifespan has prolonged. So instead of living up to 60 years, people now live 70 to 100. um, so obviously there are going to be some sort of drawbacks to that, and I think the development of neurodegenerative disease is just the body's way of coping with living to such a higher age. Like if you imagine a car engine, you drive the car for 15 years, towards the end it is at its end. You are just trying to prolong the life by doing well, oiling it, servicing it. But no matter what you do, like the car engine is old.
Yeah.
So that is basically the analogy.
That's a very cool analogy, and I can imagine a Khatara vehicle
Yeah.
trying its best to go a mile. That's very cool. Sakshi,
Yeah.
speaking of neurodegeneration and about it being age related, I know you work with geriatric population a lot, and I'm sure there are things about old age and with a geriatric population who are suffering or who are in their neurodegenerative stages, there are certain things that most of us don't know about or don't pay attention to because, let's be honest, ageism is blatant when it comes to old or age spectrum people. So, would you like to shed some light on that?
Yeah, so starting with neurodegeneration, that's a normal process. It does happen with age. It does happen to everyone. But when do you have to really pay attention is when, in accordance to the population, it is low. So it is affecting your everyday life. So while working with the geriatric population, we really pay attention to the ADLs and IADLs, that is activity of daily living and instrumental activities of daily living. But in the context, the social context of India, we see that a lot of older people don't have such activities. So there's a lot of stigma around older people working, older people managing finances. So hum chahte ki, they are not doing a lot of work, but that actually backfires because your brain is not active, yeah, and you are leading a very sedentary lifestyle. So while diagnosis also, it becomes very difficult because anyway the baseline is so low. You are not managing finances, you're not going out, you're not socializing. So all of these are factors that does affect the brain. Yeah. So,
I completely agree, and I want to sort of add on to that. A lot of people, well, there are studies on this. A lot of people who have cognitively demanding jobs,
yeah.
after they retire, if they don't engage their brain as much as it was before, you see a very sharp decline in cognitive
Yeah.
function. So it's very important after someone retires, you have to keep your mind busy, you have to keep stimulating it.
That brings me to a very pertinent question is how can we make, so for instance, kids and young adults have like challenging jobs and other roles they play in society that demands a level of thinking, demands a level of decision making, using logic and all the things that keep our brains active and running on the brain juices. But like you said, as people get older and they reach a retirement, life sort of comes to either a pause or it's like reduced 3x and it's like in slow motion. What can we do in such situations to make people of that age feel inclusive enough to have their brain challenged or active and in a way that it doesn't affect their health?
I think the entire social fabric plays a very important role. It cannot be spoken, divorced from what our social setting is. We don't have social settings where people are actively engaged. Why in the younger ages this doesn't come up? Because there's a purpose attached to your life, there's a meaning attached to your life, you're useful in a certain way. So, A, there is stigma for asking like an older person to do something, right? You are expected to take care of them and them not actively doing a lot of things. So like I said, that does backfire. And also we don't have avenues for people to be doing anything useful. So having communities that can sustain these activities, there's a lot of things they can do. Volunteer work, even people who have dementia, they also can do psychoeducation, they can talk about their experiences, there can be community living, community activities, and all of that is just missing from our social fabric, I feel.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And also, like speaking from experience, my grandmom, she spent all her life taking care of my granddad, um, who did have vascular dementia, and then after he passed, she didn't know what to do with her life.
Yeah.
So after that, she has focused her attention onto us and trying to manage our lives, which is a different problem altogether. But she doesn't have any engagements on her own. So maybe, and it's very hard now to get her to engage to do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So it's important that they are encouraged from before when they have the readiness and the mental capacity and the brain plasticity to adapt and get used to new things. So
And yeah.
yeah,
No, I like to add on that this caregiver burden also does exist a lot, where only one person in the family takes care of someone who has dementia. I usually tell the patients or clients who come to me with their families that when a person gets dementia, the entire family needs to kind of get ready because everyone's life will change, not one person.
yeah,
Generally, there's only one person, mostly spouse, who's responsible, or bahu, who's responsible for taking care of that person. And there's so much of attachment to that routine of taking care that when something happens to that individual, there is a loss of identity that happens, and a lot of burnout and a lot of anger. But
yeah.
there is care and anger. So a lot of emotional issues faced by caregivers as well. So in our setting, I feel that sharing responsibilities, is also very important, where everyone has some, can play a role. Someone can play a game, someone can take them out for a walk, someone can, talk to them. And having such setting is, I think, quite important to avoid burnout situations as well.
Absolutely.
And that's, I think, a call for action for our audience and whoever is watching this podcast about sharing responsibility, especially social responsibility when it comes to neurodegenerative diseases and geriatric mental health care. On a slightly different tangent, we have mentioned a couple of terminologies here, like vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. These are neurodegenerative diseases. Like you explained, that it comes with old age and your brain's abilities are sort of getting compromised. But how do we know what one is different from the other? So for me, if I have to interpret what is neurodegenerative diseases, I would say that I'm not performing as well as I used to when I was younger, or my memory is not as good as it was when I was younger. It might sound like a very generic statement, not giving you any sort of information about what is wrong with me. But if that is the best I'm able to communicate it to you, how do you go about diagnosing an individual? And how does the whole structure of categorizing neurodegenerative disorders or diseases come into place?
So, generally, when a patient comes to a hospital with, say, memory loss, they usually go to a neurologist or a psychiatrist, because, firstly, there is no awareness as to who to go to in the first place. So, they usually come with complaints कि memory loss हो रहा है, but पहले का तो सब याद है, अभी का क्यों भूल रहे हैं? But that's how the disease progresses. Usually, in good hospitals, you have a team of people who will address this. So, there will be a neuropsychologist who will take detailed history and do neuropsych tests to understand the level of this condition. There will be radiological tests where you will have scans. There will be blood tests to check for other problems. Is there a B12 deficiency or anything else? There will be speech therapists to see if there is no problem over there. And all of this is combined, and then a kind of decision is made that maybe it is this, and then it's tracked over time. So it's not just one person doing the job. There are a lot of people who are involved in diagnosing that, and one of them is you.
Thank you very much. I hope to make a difference to this landscape. So yeah, that's basically what Silver Matter is aiming to do. Like right now, there are no real sort of standards to diagnose neurodegenerative diseases. Like yes, someone will go to a neurologist and they will identify that there are certain cognitive deficits, but it is to the discretion of the neurologist
Yeah.
what like to phenotype the disease, and by phenotype I mean to categorize what type of disease they have. And it's important to phenotype or do this differential diagnosis so that you know what medications to prescribe. So for example, a medication for Parkinson's will be very different to a medication given to someone with
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. And that's why it's important to do this. And we need to have some sort of standard, some sort of diagnostic criteria that helps neurologists distinguish between the two. So one of the ideas of Silver Matter is to try and identify these specific pathologies that are quantifiable in the brain using MRI. So traditional diagnostic methods such as PET imaging. So by PET imaging, I don't mean dog and cat. PET stands for positron emission tomography, where it's primarily used for imaging cancers. So what happens is basically a radioactive dye is injected into the body to identify or look at a certain kind of biological process. So let's say we are trying to check if there is amyloid pathology or like Alzheimer's disease pathology in the brain. So what happens then is the radioactive substance is injected into the body. That specific pathology absorbs it, and once the patient is put into the scanner, it lights up like a Christmas tree inside. So so that is how you can detect certain types of pathologies. So what happens is PET imaging is actually quite expensive. Amyloid imaging in India is almost non-existent. It's only available in very limited
Yeah.
centers. So, but MRI, on the other hand, it is non-invasive. It is much safer than PET. It is well, less less expensive, I would say, although it might be price similar, because for making a radioactive PET tracer, you need a completely different machine,
Yeah.
which is extremely expensive to maintain. So, because of all these caveats, we are trying to develop this solution that is easily accessible to people and also could help in a more holistic diagnosis for the patient. And a lot of these patients who do go to a neurologist experiencing neurodegenerative symptoms tend to get an MRI scan
Yeah.
and get a full dementia workup.
Yeah.
So, why not get more information out of the MRI scan to inform your diagnosis and treatment?
That's really cool. So, because what you just said was extremely intriguing in terms of um lighting up like a Christmas tree. It's a very visual description of silver matter that you've given us. But I also know that you use a little bit of machine learning and AI in it. Would you want to sort of talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So, currently, there is not really a way of detecting these pathologies. So, the traditional methods of detecting, as I said, is PET imaging or something called cerebrospinal fluid markers. So, what I mean by that is it is a measure of pathology directly from the brain. So, if you have ever heard of something called a lumbar puncture, where your fluid is collected from your spine. So basically, a needle is inserted here in the lower back between, it's called L4 and L5. So there are vertebrae that you have in your spine. So a needle is inserted and fluid is collected from the spine. This is a very painful process and a very risky procedure. And no one is going to do that just to know if they have a risk for a certain kind of neurodegenerative disease. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to use AI and machine learning to try and extract this information out of an MRI scan, which is not currently possible.
Okay.
So to the naked eye, there is nothing on an MRI scan that will tell you that there is the presence of, let's say, Alzheimer's disease pathology. But with this technique, with using machine learning, we are trying to train the algorithm to identify the pathology on the MRI scans using certain features. So that is what deep learning does. Like it can it can do many computations which a human is not capable of. So for example, for this task, the machine learning algorithm is learning to you could say make a new tracer.
Okay.
So, or make a new radioactive dye without actually injecting the patient with a radioactive dye.
Okay.
So, what our product is called White Scan. What White Scan does is it takes in the MRI, it passes it through the deep learning algorithm, and it produces a pathology image.
Okay.
So it will show you something like a PET image, and it will show you where the pathology is specifically, and then we generate a report and it comes out like a blood test basically. So if the score exceeds a certain limit, then we say that there is significant pathology load. If there isn't, then there isn't. So this is trying to fit in with so right now our product is designed to detect Alzheimer's disease pathology, but we do plan to go on and explore other pathologies for other neurodegenerative or neurological diseases that could be helpful.
That's very interesting. It also has me questioning a couple of things with respect to old age and technology and acceptance of technology for people who are older. So, the newer generation, especially the internet savvy generation who were born with internet access at the tip of their hands and who are very, very familiar with terms like ADHD, OCD, depression. These are terms that are very lightly, loosely used also by certain generations because internet, right? Nobody takes anything on the internet very seriously. But when it comes to older people, especially people who might be suffering from neurodegenerative diseases, where they have some sort of a mistrust or distrust of the internet and anything technological. To be honest, like my grandmother also is very suspicious of the TV remote when it doesn't work. And to me, who had a mobile phone from the age of 15, 16, I'm like, why do you not trust a TV remote? It doesn't even have internet. It's not tracking you. To them, how do you explain all of this? Especially if you say PET scans, MRIs, it's really like it's associated with serious diseases, like you said, cancer or something with the heart or, blockages in your heart and stuff. That's the basic understanding most older age people have when it comes to these really, really hi-fi technologies. So Sakshi, since you work or you have worked with people when it comes to diagnosis, especially older population, even though there are so many advancements in technology available to us, available to practitioners to use, how do you convince the patient or get the patient's consent to bring these technologies into your rehabilitation plans?
So I don't, to be very honest. We do
Well,
have,
maybe it's time.
yeah. So we do have patients who can be very, very suspicious or scared while getting a scan done, right? So you kind of sometimes have to sedate them if it's necessary, or you avoid it if it's in early stages. A lot of times MRI doesn't even show any changes when you are just early onset MCI or something. In those cases, again I say history is very, very important, because I can be coming to you with dementia, like I feel that I'm having memory difficulties, but I've just lost someone very dear to me a month back, so it could be pseudo dementia, it could be grief, right? So in those cases, having a robust history from the family members, from the patient, becomes the key to understanding what this could be and waiting it out. And if someone has depression, suppose there is an older person who comes with depression, and they're also showing memory difficulties, you first treat the depression and you see whether it reverses. You don't, and you give, like, maybe it is MCI. You kind of hold on to your horses. That I don't use a lot of technology in my practice. I don't need to, because the tests are inherently paper pencil, and sometimes older adults can be scared of machinery. So it's very easy because you're talking to them, right? You don't even know whether you're testing. How are you? Where are we right now? It backfires also sometimes because the questions are too simple a lot of times, but then you go to more difficult questions that can also make them uncomfortable. So in my practice, technology doesn't play a very big role, and I was coming to the point that we only do offline testing. We rarely do online testing, because if you're asking someone who has a compromised cognitive function to use a laptop, to open Zoom, to do a test and pay attention to that screen and attend to me, that has so many barriers that you're missing out the complete cognitive profile of the person. So offline tests are mostly better in my opinion, and secondly, language also plays a very important role over here. So if I'm doing tests with someone who's Marathi speaking and I'm doing a test in Hindi, that's a language test and not a test of cognition. So being very mindful of the technology that you're using, that sometimes the patient is far away and you have to do a test online. So you kind of have to be mindful that this is a barrier. You still will need a test, right? If they don't have access to any psychologist over there and this is their last resort, you get an idea of the profile. But you also understand that this test was not validated for it being an online test. Yeah. So, but technology is required a lot for other diagnoses, as Manmohi was speaking.
Yeah, so I think with technology, I understand the stigma that people have, and a lot of the older generation is not so well versed with using devices, computers, and I get the apprehension that they have with technology. My father is he's so obsessed with leaking data that he, turns off all the location, any data sharing or anything on his phone. Um, but I think we also need to look at the other side, where it will actually be helpful and improve patient outcomes. So, like earlier, we would not do blood tests, that they were not so commonplace. Now, almost everyone goes for a general checkup. It can be viewed similarly. Like a lot of AI is helping doctors read scans faster. It's helping them catch missed pathologies or misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
With white scan, you are catching pathology from MRI, which has not been possible before, which is giving you more information for a better prognosis.
Yeah.
So, in that respect, like although the acceptance is lower, maybe us as a medical community or caregivers can sort of make the patients more comfortable with the idea of using technology and convince them that it will actually make their life better and easier rather than be an impeding factor.
Yeah, and I think even the premise of psychoeducation for all of this, for the families and for the general population, becomes very important because I remember during COVID, my grandmother had symptoms of dementia. Me being a master student, did not know which person to go to. So,
Absolutely.
so we don't know which is the specialist, what are the symptoms. There is behavioral change that is happening, but I don't know whether this is dementia or it's not. So psychoeducation to general public and awareness that these are the symptoms, this is who you go to, this is what you can do, these are your options, these are the tests that you can do. What does a neuropsychologist do? Like, what is their role? Why is it necessary? All of these questions are very important to discuss much, much earlier, like as an intervention. Then, in the later stages, you realize that it's missed. The diagnosis is missed because you don't know who to go to.
This also actually you bring up a very interesting point because so in a lot of neurodegenerative diseases or dementias, there is a preclinical phase, and
Yeah.
what I mean by preclinical is before you show any symptoms. So this preclinical phase can precede the disease by almost 10 to 20 years,
Okay.
and during this preclinical phase is when a lot of structural, functional, pathological blood flow changes are taking place in the brain.
Okay.
And because like nowadays with people engaged in cognitively demanding tasks, there's something called cognitive scaffolding. So a lot of people have developed a way to cope with these deficits or these changes that are taking place, which is making it harder to detect the disease in this preclinical phase. So usually when patients are diagnosed, they have already reached a stage where they're showing symptoms, and that stage is too late to do anything. So it is this preclinical phase when interventions and treatments can be most effective. And that's why like use of technology, use of whatever tools we have available to detect the disease in its earliest stages. So let's say when someone is 40, like people have screenings for breast cancer now, right? People have screening for many heart conditions when they reach a certain age. Similarly, when people reach a certain age, you need to do an evaluation of the brain. You need to see whether you are at risk for certain things and take precautions beforehand so that your life is better later. So
Yeah.
we are living in a world with what do you call it, immediate gratification,
Yeah.
but we have to play the long game here.
Yeah. And I absolutely agree because even in my practice, I see that people who are very high functioning, they usually score very well in tests like we were talking about, but they are using, they're externalizing memory a lot. So, there are mnemonics, there are, because you're used to doing that. So you don't catch it sometimes in high functioning people because on paper you see that this looks like normal, but they do have subjective complaints, but they have found a way around this cognitive difficulty because of the high reserve that they have.
That's very interesting. Also, super like I'm slightly like, should I be thinking about my brain health right now? And if it's like 20 years in before the actual pathology starts showing symptoms, that we start having biomarkers, if I may say, bodily changes that can help us identify these kind of pathologies. I was wondering if we could like change the direction of our conversation towards the younger population now and discuss something called neurodevelopmental disorders that I think Sakshi, you also have some background in, and talk about complaints that maybe people my age and your age come to you with. And something that I am guilty of doing in the past is going to my therapist and saying, I'm losing my memories. I can't remember things anymore. I'm getting old. Mind you, I'm 25. And I went to my therapist saying, I can't remember things anymore. Something's wrong with me. And it's like my brain going through some sort of a decline. Like, am I losing my memories? And all of this I did, one, because I had so much free access to the internet and all the things on social media, and just Googling things, the ability to Google things quicker and faster has, I have to say, played a big role in the paranoia it's nurtured within me about my mental health and my well-being. And I'm sure there are more people like me, because I see a lot of memes about this and I'm like, I hard relate to these things. So do you think the landscape for the younger population is also changing because of how technology is changing and how our perspective on neuro diseases, disorders is changing, and it's becoming accessible in a way but also alienating in a way, because you know, you don't know if it's actually something that's happening to you, if it's something that is like a confirmation bias, which is that you think it's happening and then you start looking for symptoms that are, you know, congruent with these diseases. Like, have you guys come across people like this in your practice, and what's your opinion on this? I'm very curious.
So we both were talking about it
Yeah.
before the podcast, and there's so much to uncover here. It can go for hours, but one point I would like to bring, that the younger generation, they are more adept. They know more about everything. It can be a fad. There are pros and cons to it, but I think that earlier, maybe few years back, there was lesser acceptability of such disorders or such problems. It's a spectrum. Like, we all are a little bit neurodivergent, right? It's a spectrum. But to be able to make spaces for them, to be able to open up this space for them, and to be able to talk about it so freely, like, you know, they also wear like pimple patches with pride.
Yeah.
You know, they're so comfortable in their skin. And people who are neurotypical, they have traditionally occupied all the spaces. But now you are making space for people who are neurodivergent. And I feel memes are an excellent way to talk about it, because stories, like narratives around things, is what makes acceptance easier. So when people are making jokes about it, they have already kind of made shook hands with it. So I find it quite wholesome that people are talking about it, people are making jokes about it. Of course, there are people who might now are not fitting in the neurodivergent bandwagon, and they also want to jump in. So there are these issues as well. But all in all, I find that the more we talk about it, the more normal it becomes. You know, there is more acceptance and there is more space for everyone to be.
I think we could sort of give a small introduction to people about what neurodivergence
Sure.
is.
Yes, of course. By neurodivergent is having some form of impediment
Yeah.
that can hamper certain abilities because of that inherent impediment that you have. It could be something like ADHD.
Yeah.
So you are, which also brings me to that whole conversation that we had before about people saying, "Arey, मेरा memory नहीं है." Like I cannot remember things, so मेरा memory चला जा रहा है, मुझे Alzheimer हो गया है. That's not true. Like in most cases, especially with younger people, it's almost always an attention problem.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Like, if you haven't encoded, or the information is not stored in your brain, you are not going to retrieve it magically.
Yeah, that's a cool part. Let's break down how memory becomes a memory for people so we can go into the depths of what is encoding and what is decoding and then retrieval and how it's so closely related to attention.
Sure. So
Yeah.
I am really glad that you brought up that point. I have been waiting to show everyone Pathos. So, hi everyone. Please say hi to Pathos.
Hello, Pathos.
He has been my buddy for a long time now. He's been with me since 2017. And he has been with me through thick and thin. So I have I know it seems strange that I have such an emotional connect with a skull. But he's helped me a lot, and he's been there for me when there was nobody.
Does the
So,
skull come with a brain though?
yes, actually, he does.
Ooh.
Don't worry. No matter what I do to him, he still doesn't feel bad. Like I can break his jaw too.
Wow.
But it's okay. It goes back into the sockets. So that is how your jaw breaks when your jaw breaks. So coming back to how memory works. So there is something called the limbic system, and it is very closely connected to your affective states. So I'll start from what you can see on the outside and what is tangible. So you have your nose here, okay?
Do you want me to hold it for the camera
Yes,
so you
there you
can
go.
see?
So you have your nose here, and what happens is when you smell things, there are afferents that come down from the brain, from
Afferents as in?
nerves,
Okay.
nerve endings that come down from the brain. So here, okay, and this is where the brain sits in like this, okay. So basically, there are nerve endings that come from here. There are little holes inside the brain that go into the nose. Um, so these that you can see, these yellow tracts here, that's where the nerves come from. So the nerves come from here and they pass through these tiny little holes there, and that is basically how you smell. And smell is highly interconnected with memory. So if you try to think back to a time where you smelled something, and let's say your mom's cooking, it actually brings back a lot of memories, and that's because your sense of smell is very closely linked to your memory system and the limbic system and your affective states. So basically, these are called the olfactory tracts. This is what helps you smell. The olfactory tracts are then connected to well, I won't explain the whole network here because this will go on for hours. But the olfactory tracts or the your sense of smell is connected to this part of the brain. This is called the cingulate gyrus. So this is what the brain looks like when you divide it into half. This way in the sagittal plane, that's what it's called. Um, the olfactory tracts that I showed you, the part of the brain that helps you smell is here on the bottom. This is the front of the brain, this is the back of the brain, and this is the cingulate cortex. Okay. So the cingulate cortex acts as intermediary between the outside world and your inner self. So your judgments, your perspectives, your views, your moods are highly controlled by this part, and that part is also connected to something called the hippocampus, which is your memory center. So, this is the part of the brain that is affected the most in Alzheimer's disease, which is why you see memory loss. So, basically, you've got the olfactory sense here, or the sense of smell here, which is connected to this part of the brain, which is called the cingulate cortex, which controls your emotions and your inhibitions, which is then also linked to something called the hippocampus, which is this part right here. It lies in quite a deep portion of the brain. It's called the medial temporal lobe region. Um, and this part of the brain is responsible for long term memory. So, I have a really interesting story about the hippocampus. So, there was this lady called Eleanor Maguire. she published a study in 2006 about London taxi drivers. So you might have heard about
Yes,
this
Yeah.
yes, it's
actually,
a very
coming
fun
from a
story. Yeah.
psychology background. So, to be able to pass the London taxi driver test, you have to memorize the map of London.
Yeah.
And London, it has so many like one way roads, so many tiny alleys that you have to remember a lot to be able to pass that test. So she did a study where she measured the hippocampi of London taxi drivers, and a control population, someone who's not a London taxi driver. And she found that the taxi drivers had much larger hippocampi than the control
Control.
group. And that goes to show like how much it is involved in long term memory, and especially spatial memory, which is your memory of locations, different locations. And in Alzheimer's, that's what you sort of see, a decline in the person's ability to make new memories, and also the ability to remember places. So someone will forget where their house is, someone will forget where their keys are. And I think you spoke about this earlier, right? Like people usually come to you and they say that patients remember everything in the past, but
Yeah.
they can't remember anything
Yeah.
recent. So that is called retrograde and
Yeah.
anterograde amnesia. Retrograde is basically when you can't remember things in the past,
Past.
and anterograde is when you can't remember things
In the
in the
future.
new memories, which is what tends to happen in
Yeah.
Alzheimer's and a lot of neurodegenerative diseases. So yeah, that is sort of an overview of how memory works in the brain. And of course, it is quite interconnected to mood. So that's why a lot of our memories, you also tend to feel the emotions when you remember things. Also, quick note, if you ever want techniques to remember things in an exam, try to associate different smells with when you are
Oh.
studying different things. So, like if you keep orange peels when you are studying about autism, then if you sort of are able to evoke that smell during the exam, it is possible that
Yeah.
you'll sort of link that, and your learnings about autism will come back to you.
That's so cool.
I use that trick in my master's exams. So,
That is so cool.
um, yeah,
So,
moving on.
I want to bring up a point about Alzheimer's, like you were saying. And what generally helps, I use this statement which I learned from the person I was learning from, is that when you think of AD, Alzheimer's disease, you kind of think of a train that is going back in time. So
okay.
generally, first you will lose the current things like new memories. That's the first thing that'll go. And eventually, as the disease progresses, you will start forgetting things about your past. So deeper into the past will go the last. So that's
Okay.
why language remains intact for a very, very long time, especially mother language. So that's the mother tongue. The languages that you've learned later in life, they start going. So that's also something that helps understand that कि पहले का सब याद है, अभी का क्यों नहीं है. That's what generally happens. So also misidentification later in the stages, that you think that your son is your husband, or things like that, not identifying people as well, that generally happens later in stages.
That's very cool. I also have a question regarding this ability to hold on to the first things that you learn, like mother tongue and everything. Has it got to do with the fact that you have spent so much time with that it's difficult, or like that's the last thing to go? Like, for instance, if from a very young age I have learned say how to write with both my hands, and I start losing my ability to I don't know, just write with this hand, that is my non-dominant hand. Would my ability to write with my dominant hand go last, because that is something I picked up first? So I started writing with my right hand first, and then I learned how to write with my left hand, and then I learned how to write with both my hands. So the practice writing with my right hand is the longest. Does that have something to do with how we lose memory?
So I'll address a part of it. A part of it is the anatomy of it. One part of it, what you're saying is, one is episodic memory and one is procedural memory.
Okay.
What we are talking about is episodic memory. So events from life, and new skills that you learn has a problem, because hippocampus is responsible, correct me if I'm wrong, for
Yeah.
learning new things, right? And that's the one that gets impaired. But procedural memory stays still longer, right? Even so, there are a lot of case examples also where people have had injuries. They don't remember playing chess ever, but they can play chess when they can play chess.
Ah.
So both are stored in different parts of the brain. But when we are talking about losing certain memories later that were formed earlier, I think has more to do with the anatomy of it as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. Because so the way memory sort of develops over time, or like how your brain develops over time, we need to go back to the roots. So what happens when our brain is developing or when it's young is that there are certain types of brain cells that are responsible for the maintenance of other types of brain cells, like our main neurons. So these are called oligodendrocytes. Usually, when we are younger, the ratio of one oligodendrocyte per neuron is much higher. So, like one oligodendrocyte will, maintain one neuron. But as we grow older, one oligodendrocyte tends to maintain multiple neurons. Let's say four to five. Now, when we are aging, and we are going through neurodegeneration, if cells are affected, like our blood flow is also, of course, affected, the number of nutrients that are going to neurons is affected. Now, if one oligodendrocyte that is maintaining four to five neurons dies, then that means those four, five neurons are losing the nutrition. That means that they will undergo neurodegeneration. That's why the memories that you make beforehand tend to stay longer than the memories that you make afterwards, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely.
Talking about maintenance itself of, say, the neurons or the person with the disease, uh, what are your thoughts on the current climate of caregiving when it comes to, be it with neurodevelopmental disorders, neurodegenerative disorders, anything with respect to neurology? How do you think, how well prepared do you think we are to provide care, to provide compassion, empathy, and also to create inclusive space for these people?
So that's a tough question, because I said um, we tend to prioritize neurodevelopmental disorders a little more than neurodegenerative, because neurodevelopmental is generally caught early and it's with the child, and you tend to invest more into the child. But when you think of neurodegenerative disorders, it's happening to a person who's lived a life. So economically, that person may not be viable also to you. And those are tough questions, right? Because it is expensive. Geriatric care is expensive, palliative care is very expensive. So, how much you can put in to the care and management of this is also a question. So, I feel that there is an unequal thing that is happening in the care of neurodegenerative diseases. But having said that, I feel that a lot of things can be done um, in our day-to-day life to be able to manage these problems better, even with anyone, like anyone who is facing a cognitive challenge can use, a lot of tricks and a lot of exercises. Just like physical exercise is necessary for our motor functions, a lot of cognitive exercise can be done to improve our cognitive functions.
Could you give me like an example of what exactly a cognitive exercise would be? So for physical health, motor health, I can go on a walk, I can go on a run, I can go to the gym, functional exercise. But what can I do for my cognitive well-being? Like anything, Sudoku, something like that, would that help?
Everything helps. So, even you talking is a cognitive function. So, you are following what I'm saying, you are paying attention to it, you are thinking, what shall I say next? And then relating to it, and then coming up with an answer, retrieving the words. A lot of things are happening. So, just this is not a simple conversation. So in neurodegenerative diseases also, you'll find that they'll have shorter answers. They'll not be able to come up with longer answers. So socialization is also a very important and overlooked part. Having communities, like I said earlier, to be able to share stories, to be able to talk, engage, generally, you shut yourself off because you are having some retrieval difficulties, and you've been a high functioning person, and suddenly you don't remember words, which happens to younger people as well, which is a very normal phenomenon. Only when it's very, very difficult and it interferes with your daily living, daily life, that you think of it and you try to get it checked. But in general, everyone can have some retrieval difficulties, and Manmohi also has a lot of tricks related to it. But in general, I feel the more you use uh, yourself to do your things rather than externalizing things. Like if I have to order six things, right? And I just go to Blinkit, and it's very easy that you have ordered and you will remember through the day. But what if you kind of go through it in your mind, you try to remember those 6 or 10 items, and you take a walk and you go to the grocery shop and you yourself pick up all of those things. You have to go through different lanes, you have to walk, you have to remember directions. So there are so many things happening when you're recalling kya kya lena tha. Then you go for a walk, you have to remember the directions, you change your path, you find a newer way of going to that same shop, you make it a little more difficult. Then you kind of go to a certain section where there are toothpaste, and you kind of try to find out which toothpaste that I want. And you don't take a list, you don't write it down what were the 6 items, and you try to recall what the 6 items were, and then you use it. So I feel that even in our day to day life, when we use our cognitive facilities rather than comfort, it helps because you are practicing it. And in general, learning any new hobby helps because it's a treat for the brain. Whenever you're learning something new, it has to really work. And there are a lot of, that's why it's uncomfortable also for a lot of neurodivergent people to go and learn something new, because it is a task. It's a task for the brain, but a good task. So learning any hobby, a lot of older people start learning gardening. You can learn a new language. You can learn music, and you don't have to be expert at it. It's just the act of getting the wheels moving also helps.
Absolutely. And biologically speaking, like this learning process, it's not actually increasing your brain matter. Like that's how we usually sort of associate. Ki, I'm learning, so I'm increasing my brain cells. That's not the case. Learning a new thing is about rewiring your connections.
Yeah.
That's how you can think about it, like making these connections stronger, making connections between different brain regions more strong. So doing this rather than increasing your brain matter is, I feel, more important. And like you said, like there are certain tricks in your everyday life that you can do, like something as simple as reading the newspaper from right to left instead of left to right. um, and of course the grocery list. And then also, if you read, then while you're reading a book, don't use a bookmark. Go back to the page, like try to remember what page you were at and go back to that page when you pick it up the next time. I also think you touched on social interaction, which I think is very, very important. If you've noticed, like a lot of people don't make this association, but hearing loss is one of a very big factor in
Dementia.
in dementia, and it progresses much faster.
Yeah.
So it's quite important because when someone is experiencing hearing loss, in addition to their social reclusion, they don't hear things. So then they are not included in conversations. And then it's just like them internally alone, like loneliness. And then a lot of other factors come into it, like depression, anxiety. And those again are massive risk factors for dementia. So it's an all-encompassing sort of um, change or habitat that you have to create for yourself. And also coming to like talking about management again, I would say prevention is better than cure. So mm, these habits have to be inculcated before you reach a stage where you are so rigid, because you are only comfortable doing what like your body also and your brain also has limited capabilities by the time you get to when you are 70. So having these habits from before will go a long way in managing that disease in
Absolutely. I
later
think
life.
cognitive hygiene is so important, and you can do a lot of games as well, right? But more than that, active lifestyle changes, like you were saying, is so important and plays like it's the long game that you have to have an active, and also you cannot separate the physical activity from the cognitive activity, because you cannot just kind of play sudoku and think that okay, now I'll be fine. You have to have physical changes. So like Manmohi was saying, that it's a mixture of a lot of things, and lot of things that are intertwined with each other, and a hygiene, a physical hygiene, a mental hygiene, and emotional hygiene, to have people around you, to be able to manage your emotions. All of those things also play a very important role in cognitive function.
And I also think that, especially in India, we view like mental health in such a negative light.
Yeah.
Like when you are sick, like there is some sort of physical symptom you're getting, you have no shame in going to the doctor.
Yeah.
But let's say someone's experiencing anxiety or depression, going to a psychologist is such a taboo. Like I don't really understand. It's just you're sick, so you have to go see the doctor. Like it's as simple as that.
It is not viewed, it also seems like a willpower thing to be able to
Yeah.
sustain yourself through that anxiety
Yeah.
and not fall weak. But it is something that is inherently present and it can be addressed, but because of so much of stigma around it, that at workplace, so you can definitely not talk about it, because you will lose opportunities over there. So there are real time consequences also
Yes.
of accepting these problems. It's not that they are just not ready, but I think we as a society completely kind of needs to take smaller steps. And we've spoken about psychoeducation so many times, but it plays very important role in removing that emotional load from that problem, or that thing that is happening. It's a problem because we made it a problem. But to remove that emotional context from it and to be able to see it just as it is, will help, I think, all of us.
Absolutely.
That's a very insightful sentence you just said about it's a problem because we have made it a problem. So, um, we're coming to an end to our podcast, but I really want to know, in the name of psychoeducation, especially, what is one thing we can start from today, a practice that maybe all of us can indulge in, or Arisa as an organization can help promote, that you think would be a good step towards making our world space we occupy more inclusive and more aware of neurodegenerative diseases, people who have these diseases, who have these disorders. What can we do today? What is the call of action for us today that could make a difference, maybe later on, maybe tomorrow, maybe 20 years down the line?
I think just that we are actually doing it today, to create a space to have a dialogue about it. That people who are working in these fields, to let other people also know that these things exist. And to, when we are talking about it, there is more acceptance towards such disorders, such spectrums. So the I think just by the fact that we all can come here and talk about it without being judged is the first step towards acceptance or understanding what any neurodegenerative disease would be.
I completely agree, and this is actually a great platform to. It's actually been such an enjoyable conversation for me. I haven't spoken about these things because of everyday life, mundane life, and talking about this is just very refreshing for me. But also at the same time, it also gives me joy that we are doing something to increase people's awareness about things like this. And I guess our take home message is to, like, and it's as simple as live a healthy life.
Yeah.
Prevention is better than cure. Try to get into good habits now, because it will be very, very difficult when you are older. And yeah, like, thank you for providing this platform for Silver Matter and
Sakshi.
Sakshi.
Yeah. I would just add one point over here. I also very strongly believe that neuroscience and neuropsych should be part of the curriculum because it's not taught till the very tail of masters, and a lot of changes can be done by just introducing it to the academic settings.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point to end on, and also something for Arisa to work on, building more conversations around neuroscience, neuroanatomy, just psychology in general, especially reaching out to a population that may not be familiar with these things. And I'm so glad that the two of you chose to spend today with us and have such lovely conversations with us. Thanks for bringing your brain along
Pathos.
and yes, pathos along and introducing the world to beautiful skull and the brain within. And thank you, Sakshi, so much for your insight on everything. Like, it was so helpful to know what it's like to be in the position of a psychologist or a neuropsychologist, talking and having these conversations in real time, and also to understand the effort that goes into being able to identify something as being wrong or something that is not in place.
Yeah.
Things that I think laymen would not actually identify or even address as a problem as long as we're able to cope with it. So, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you to all our audiences who stayed and watched our episode. And this is Native Narratives from Arisa Foundation. We hope you enjoyed and come back again for our next episode.